I didn't have time, and even so, my typing takes time. I can actually type 200 words per minute. I have to retype 198 of them. So that slows me down if you're real technical about, counting how much. Okay, we are going to continue, but at a slower pace, some of what we have been talking about. I'm going to do a little review today, and let's just have a little conversation here. A lot of what I'm talking about, I think is very important, just to give it time to soak in and to think about not only what the various principles are that we're talking about, but how they manifest themselves in society, because I think that's been a real problem for Christians. I would also say this, from my perspective, as a pastor of a church, the question might be asked, why do we care to know this? What are we trying to study here? Well, I'll tell you what I'm not trying to do, and that is I'm not trying to equip the saints to go out and fix the world, because that's not our job. Although I do expect that you and I, because we live in this world, are going to fight the good fight of democracy and try to make things as good as we can, and to understand the difference between the various parties here is really important to do that. From the church's perspective, however, here is something that's vitally important, and that is we are losing a lot of people in the church. This has been going on for a long time, and it has been increasing, particularly young people. And one of the reasons why we're losing them is we're not losing them to other recognized religions. We're losing them to this stuff here that we're talking about. And it's really important, and it's not just the young people. This stuff infiltrates the thinking of adults sitting in the pews a lot more than we realize, and a lot more than is healthy. And it is necessary, I think, for the church to be much more intentional about talking about the world in which we live and how it's infecting the church, because we're supposed to be infecting the world, not the other way around. Another huge issue here, we talk a lot about, when we talk about different churches, we can talk about different denominations. I don't get too exercised about different denominations for the most part. I mean, I think it's very interesting, and I enjoy studying the differences between denominations to see what makes a Methodist tick, for example. And you'll find things in there where I say, well, I don't really like that. I don't think that's the best way of reading the Scripture. And then I find other things that are really quite insightful that we can learn from. And I think the different denominations, each one, I think, brings something to the table, some more, some less. But one thing that I have very little patience for is what is often called, the divide between liberal and traditional or conservative congregations. But here it's important for us to understand what I mean by that, okay? And that is, a liberal church, to me, is a church that has bought into a great deal more of the stuff that we're talking about here. And they're trying to blend. They are trying to make the Christian message more approachable and amenable and fit better with a modern mindset. The problem is that's sort of like trying to make Christianity fit better with a Muslim mindset. I mean, you either be one or the other, but if you're going to be in between, you're going to be the worst of both. And so we have a lot of that. So a lot of what passes for, what we oftentimes call the mainstream Protestant denominations, what has happened with many of them is that they have bought into a lot more of this modernistic thinking and are trying to blend what had been traditional Christian ways of understanding things with this stuff. And what you end up with is something worthless. And I think that this might be something where Jesus would say, I don't even know if he would say it was lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth. I'm not sure it's even lukewarm. Give me a good, solid, rousing argument in a good sense between a Baptist and a Lutheran, and I'll show you something that's with a lot of spiritual vitality there. You might say that one side is right and one side is wrong on some particular issue. But even when you're wrong, you can be wrong for the right reasons, and we can still learn from that. But when you try to force Christianity to get with the 21st century, we are forgetting something. And that is, we don't hail from the 21st century, and we're not here with a 21st century message. We are here with a timeless message. It should be as valuable in the 21st century as any other time. But let's face it, if an important part of your message is only relevant for the 21st century because it comes from the 21st or the 20th century, what do we say for all the centuries before that when Jesus came? So we need to be very careful about that. It's protecting the church and the sheep in the church from what is a very, very corrosive set of ideas that are out in the world, and people aren't really aware of where these things are coming from. So, a quick review. I've been calling it metaphysical naturalism. That is to distinguish it from what's sometimes called methodological naturalism. In other words, in our methods of inquiring about things, we're going to just ignore God. It's not that we're being atheists. We're just not going to worry about whether God's going to fiddle with my experiment, and I'm going to trust that the data is reliable and represents what would happen at other times and in other places. That's methodological. It has nothing to do with actually whether you believe there's a God or not. You just don't believe that he's going to interfere. Or if he does, we'll throw away that data set and do the experiment again, and this time we'll have better data. But metaphysical naturalism is the assertion that there is no God to mess with things. There isn't anything but what we're measuring. And that's the poison at the center of this. And there's a huge leap. This fools a lot of people because methodological naturalism, or we may say the scientific method, does a lot of wonderful things for us. It creates microwave ovens and all kinds of medicines and heats and cools our buildings, and through the wonders of chemistry and the wonders of engineering has made our lives just infinitely better than they used to be from a physical point of view. None of that owes its success to this to this metaphysical naturalism at all. None of it. Zero. It all is owing to the fact that science as a method of approaching and gaining knowledge about the physical world and the buildup of knowledge that we have because of that is very powerful, but is fundamentally no different than what the Romans used to do. We're just further down the road and are more sophisticated about it. But the Romans knew how to build aqueducts, and they knew how to build roads that still exist today. When Jesus was a carpenter, he did things that manifested technologies and abilities of the day. And so science is nothing different. Science, in that sense, is not any threat to Christianity at all. In fact, it is born, in many ways, of Christianity. And we can embrace it, and there's no challenge there whatsoever. Where you have a challenge is not there. It's that leap to say that there's nothing but matter and energy out there. All right. So some of the things that we've talked about here is that that there's no meaning or purpose out there. There's just stuff. It's just the stuff of the universe has important implications, and one of those implications is if there's no meaning or purpose in life, human beings simply can't thrive that way. So if you are told that there's no meaning or purpose in the universe, then you will create your own meaning or purpose. And that's what I'm referring to when I talk about existentialism. That is to say, my meaning is that whatever meaning and purpose I can glean out of this universe from my perspective. You've got your own, you've got your own, we all have our own. And the one unforgivable sin when you're a bunch of existentialists gathered together is for me to try to impose my reality on you or to let you impose your reality on me, okay? So since we don't have a universal fixed point to say, okay, this is real, then the only reality is what everybody has, and nobody's reality is better or worse than anybody else's. This leaks its way out into a lot of what we have going on in our society these days. Regarding moral reasoning, I point out here that there is no such thing in naturalism. I'm just going to call it naturalism from now on. There's no such thing as a what should be. And remember, for us, that is the imperative. When we talk about moral reasoning, what we're actually saying is what should be. A thing is good when it is the way it should be. A thing is bad when it falls short of the way it should be. But this is assuming that there is a way a thing should be. But if you are a naturalist, there is no such thing as a should be. There may be a way you want it. There may be a way you prefer it. But there's no way it should be. There's just the way things are. Okay? So one of the things that naturalists like to pride themselves on is they have the courage to accept things the way they are. So they will accuse the likes of you and I of needing a crutch. I had a guy the other day mention that. He says, so is this for you like a crutch? And I said, absolutely. I don't have any problem with that. It is a crutch, okay? Because I'm more than willing to acknowledge that without Jesus Christ, I don't have a life I even care to live, and I need to have this. Now, that doesn't make it true, you understand. Just because I need it doesn't make it true, but just because I need it doesn't make it not true either. The fact is, it's true, and I need it, okay? When the naturalist says, well, I don't need that, I think the naturalist is lying. Okay, I think the naturalist has got a substitute and doesn't realize it. Okay, and so what you end up with when there's no should be, two things are important here. Number one is whatever is becomes normative. That is to say, the way it should be is the way it is. And you note how much in our society today people are always appealing to what is, and the most important way to be is whatever is natural, be natural. And they will criticize an awful lot of moral thinking as unnatural, because you're always talking about things that's just not the way the world is. That's not the way nature is, and we need to be more in tune with what is natural. And then you end up with a moral relativism. This goes hand in glove with the existentialism. Okay, if my reality is my reality and your reality is your reality, then my moral reasoning is my moral reasoning and your moral reasoning is your moral reasoning, and we may have to negotiate amongst ourselves so we don't step on one another's toes. But you can't really say your way is right and my way is wrong. We just may have to agree that we're going to do it this way or that way or some third way, so that we don't bump into one another. But you don't have any right to tell me what's right and wrong, and I don't have any right to tell you what's right and wrong. We'll just all make our own realities. Okay, this is a very important part of being a modern person in our modern world. How many of you like modern art? Nobody's raising their hand? Now, isn't that shocking? One of the reasons why nobody likes modern art is because that's one of the things that modern art is trying to throw at you. There is no right or wrong, there is no order, so it tends to be rather chaotic and random. That's kind of the idea that it's getting at, okay? And that is the old style paintings where everything was so orderly and beautiful, and all the lines and beautiful naturescapes where everything was just so. You know, that is sort of implying a beauty and an order to things that is really not there. That's something we're imposing upon the world. But we modern people are going to be braver about that. And of course the artists jump way out in front and they want to be in the vanguard of this. So they create the most obnoxious and worthless of paintings, and then we hang it up in museums and pretend that it's okay. Well, but nobody likes it. And the reason nobody likes it is because it's just not where we live. That is not the way we live our lives. We like things that are beautiful and orderly, and we don't like things that are chaotic. And if you tell me, well, the way the world really is chaotic, so fill your house with this stuff, I'm going to say, well, I'd rather live in my dream world. Thank you. Okay. Let's see here. We talked about nature being assumed normative, so whatever's in nature is supposed to be right, and the rejection of natural law. The idea of natural law is there's things built into nature or built into human beings. So natural law would say that the human being is born and sort of hardwired, to use that language, hardwired with a conscience and a certain understanding of what's right and what's wrong. Or so St. Paul in Romans would talk that way about we have consciences that accuse or excuse us. And he's not talking about Jews, he's talking about anybody and everybody. In fact, he's speaking about those without the revelation of God still have a sense of right and wrong. He also, in Romans chapter 1, talks about the existence of God and his power and eternal qualities is written in nature. And we see this quite a lot in Scripture, where it is assumed that when we're looking at natural things, we are seeing the handiwork of God, and we are able to determine things about God. Now, we're not going to be able to get very personal about this, but we can. The existence of God is written in the stars, so to speak, and that would be an example of natural law. But a naturalist would deny that there's any such thing as a natural law. remember that human customs and human sensibilities about what's right and wrong, whatever your conscience is, they would either say, well, this is the voice of your mother, right? You've heard that. Or this is just the result of millennia of, when we used to live in Africa and on the savannah and we were trying to survive and the lions were attacking and all of this kind of stuff. And these were things that helped build cohesion in the community, and when we had cohesion in the community, we're more likely to survive, and so these things passed on, and so now these are relics of when we used to live in the African savannah in order to survive. Of course, we are very sophisticated today. This is the undertone that you'll get a lot, and that is that today we modern people are more sophisticated than people used to be, and we don't need these things anymore. It's an incredibly arrogant mindset. And when you see what modern thinking has done with our modern world, and I mean, in terms of the butchery and the savagery, there should be more humility there. And how quick they are to accuse Christianity, they'll usually say religion, but what they mean is Christianity, as the source of every evil and all wars and so on like that. This is just normal. I mean, they say this. It's like they don't even have to prove it anymore. Okay, we talked about the nature of the human being. Not going to go hugely into this again. And we'll come back to it now and again, but not right now. And that is, we are the product of biological evolution and sociological evolution. Everything is a matter of evolution and essentially Darwinism. It's a survival of what works and a passing away of what doesn't, and that means human culture. That means our psychological makeups, how the human body is put together, as well as how our minds work and how the community works, is all an adaptation to whatever has been from the primordial past to produce us. It is not because we are made in the image of God. It is not because God has created us and hardwired us to live in the creation He's made. It is not that at all. So when we see these fine balances in nature and the balances between human beings and between human beings and nature and all of that, we are not seeing God's handiwork there. We are just seeing the random effects of millions of years of adaptations. It is meaningless. It's just what is, okay? That's what a human being is. Once again, you go to the Museum of Modern Art, you'll see what a human being is there. Everything is reduced to ugliness. And in fact, being ugly is one of the things that, they would disagree with this, but I don't know how you produce so much art that's so ugly, except that you're trying to be ugly and offensive. Why would you try to be offensive in your artwork, by the way?
To shock. Get attention.
Why do you want to shock people? You're right. Why do you want to shock people? To get them to think and to get them out of their comfort level, because this is the way you were raised, this is the way it was supposed to be. But I'm here because I'm like a prophet, okay? How can we have a prophet when there is no God? But they're like a prophet of the truth, and I'm here to tell you the truth. And it's a sad truth, and the sad truth is nothing matters and everything is meaningless, but you need to hear this. You need to grow up, you need to stop being a child. So here's an offensive piece of art or literature or movie or whatnot like that. We're going to come back to this in a minute, but an awful lot of modern thinking is designed to deconstruct and destroy everything that has come before. I will point out this also. As we all know, it's just a matter of common sense in life. It is a lot easier to tear down than it is to build. Okay? Now think about then this battle between Christianity and naturalism and the postures that the two sides have. Christianity comes to build. We are constructing a world, a future, a meaning, a purpose, and an end to it all. It is a very comprehensive view of things that literally explains where we came from, why we're here, and where we're going. It doesn't explain everything about everything. It doesn't attempt to do that. But it is very constructive. Now, on the other hand, naturalism is the opposite. All it does is take somebody like us and poke holes and find fault with whatever it is that we say is the real explanation of things. If you ask them, well, what is the explanation of the things? It all comes back to the same. It is what it is. It is what it is because. And how do you know? Because this is what it is. Well, how do you know that this is how it became? Because this is where we are. And if this is where we are, this is where we must have come. This must be what we had to be because this is what we are and there's nothing else to explain anything. It's their answer for everything.
They worship entropy.
And they imagine that entropy produces what we're doing now. They would just interpret this sociologically. But they don't, so all they do is tear down and tear down and tear down, which is why you have so much modern thinking is about debunking things from the past. And it is very destructive. It is hard to build a society on tearing down. Now, it's not like a naturalist gets up in the morning and says, I want to tear everything down. It's not that. They think that they're just being truthful. That's what they think. They're just being truthful. I'm telling, it's the hard truth, but I'm here to tell you the hard truth. And so they're not apologetic about it. They think they're doing us a service. Note that human beings do not exist on a higher order, and there's nothing particularly unique about human beings. There's nothing particularly unique about Earth. There's nothing particular. In fact, they go to great lengths. If you study anything about origins or cosmology, you'll see that there are great lengths to explain how very ordinary and ununique everything is. By the way, how many times have you seen this extraordinary statement, and an extraordinary unscientific statement that scientists will absolutely abide by? Is there or is there not other intelligent life in the universe? If you're a scientist, what is the answer?
Don't know.
No. The answer is yes. Now, the answer should be I don't know. Okay? Why is the answer yes?
Statistics.
Statistics. There is you put two things together and you get the answer. Number one is, we are the result of natural processes, correct? If you're a naturalist, we are. We are one of zillions of other possible places where this could have happened. Well, if this happened here by nature, then it would be just silly to say it didn't happen anywhere else. So the question for your typical scientist is not going to be, is there other intelligent life? Only how much?
And where?
Many and where. You know, there might be a mystery about why we can't see it, and you have explanations for that too. So the thing is that is a profoundly unscientific, because in science, in order to build up a sort of a data set, you have to have a data set. I don't know what this is doing or why it's doing it. You have to have more than one data point. Okay, how many data points do we have for the rising of life?
One.
One. So what can you conclude from one instance? Nothing. It could be that this happens everywhere. You put some rock and float it around in space, and sooner or later it'll develop life. It could be this is the one and the only time it has ever happened. There's no way to say. But if you talk to a scientist, and I don't, a scientist, that's not, you know, when you talk to a naturalist, they almost always will say, oh yeah, there's life out there, even though there's really no reason to assume that. You have no idea whether there's, I mean, forget God, just let's assume there is no God. You have no way of knowing. There's no point in you saying anything other than, okay, well, there's lots of other planets out there, but that doesn't tell you anything about whether there's any life on any others, except the assumption. If you say we have 300 zillion other planets like our own, does that tell you life is on any of those other planets? No. But if you say that life arose here by purely natural forces, absolutely unexceptional, and there's a zillion other planets like this one, is it reasonable to assume that life has occurred elsewhere? Absolutely then. So as a matter of statistics, it becomes not just possible, it becomes virtually certain. If I flip a coin 10,000 times, what's the chance that at least one of them is going to be heads if this is a normal coin? It's certain. Is there a possibility that it wouldn't? Yeah, it's possible, but in reality, it's certain. Okay. We talked about individuals, since you have your reality and I have mine. An awful lot of the social mischief that we have in our world today is because each of us are constructing our own morality, and because in our own realities, and because the one thing that our culture insists upon is authenticity, we simply, you can't refer to some fixed point and say, here's what's right, now we all need to get on board with that, okay? But folks, that is exactly what the church does. Here's a fixed point, we all need to get on board with that. Not just Christians, but everybody. If you believe that everybody creates their own meaning and purpose, and if you believe that the only true and genuine truth for an individual is what you have created for yourself, and if you believe that the one unforgivable sin is either forcing somebody else to believe the way you do or to allow somebody else to tell you to believe the way they do, if you believe that, then you can see that Christianity in the form that we have it here is a totally obnoxious thing and a completely childish and from the very beginning. It doesn't matter what we say. See, it's not like you have examined the doctrine and say that this is wanting. The fact that there is a doctrine means it's wrong. Now, I'm going to pause for a minute because I don't want to just keep talking and assume that all of you are seeing this and recognize what I'm talking about. Is this stuff, the kind of things that I'm mentioning, the kind of attitudes that people have, is this stuff that you'd say, well, yeah, I have seen that, or actually, I don't, this is all a mystery to me. Do we have any comments out there? You're free to make one.
All the time.
This is the stuff of Oprah Winfrey, you understand?
Yeah. Our community, I would say you don't see it. I think it's more regional, unless you watch the news, and then it's in your face.
Or if you engage with those of other political viewpoints. And
Right.
Well, yes, it is true that, well, let me take a different example. If you watch the news, you would think that race is such a divisive thing that whites and blacks simply can't talk to one another. And yet, all the black people that interact with me on a day-by-day basis, I haven't noticed any change, and when I talk to them, they seem to talk the same way I do. They seem to have the same thoughts as I do, so one wonders where this is coming from. It is true that it is not only regional, but it depends on what kind of person you are. But actually, it is more infectious than this. Particularly, you will see that our young people buy into this kind of stuff a lot more. Now, part of this is young people are always stupider. Well, they are. They're experimenting in things, and the last thing they want to be told is the way they have to be, so they all get out there. And the world is going to provide them a range of opportunities. The thing is, it's not like it used to be, where the Lutheran would take a walk on the wild side and go to a Catholic church for a little while, just to get mom and dad upset. In those days, you could choose alternate paths, and they were either variations on the theme or they were downright criminal. And if they're downright criminal, they're sort of self-correcting errors. Most people are smart enough to finally get out of this and realize this is just not the way to live a life. Or you just decide that you're going to be a Baptist, Methodist, or a Catholic for a while, and then you maybe decide you're going to be that way forever. But you're not that far away. You're still having all the same basic assumptions, and you've got some arguments over some words in Scripture. Today, young people are offered a whole wide panoply of things that they can believe that if they buy into that, there's no road back. In other words, you can take a look at a Baptist, and people ask me this all the time. What's the difference between a Lutheran and a Baptist? Well, okay, we can take them off. But what's the difference between your reality and other people's reality? It depends on which people we're talking. And it depends on you which day of the week we're talking about. Everything is always shifting. There isn't anything that we can say, well, this is right. This is the one thing we're going to hold on to. There's not. Okay. Like I mentioned last week, if you want to study religion, if you want to hear about religion, okay, unless you're hearing about it in church, if you're going to hear about it on the History Channel, if you're going to hear about it on poor Oprah Winfrey, I keep picking on her, if you're going to read magazine articles about it, if you're going to read every year, National Geographic and other magazines will have something about Christmas and the origins of Christmas, something about Easter and the origins of Easter, the relevant times of the year. And when you read these things, you see that we are getting a very different view of what Christianity is. We are not getting the view that Christianity presents of itself. We are getting the view of the unbelieving world's view of Christianity. the distinction between the Jesus of faith and the Jesus of history in the last 150 years or so has become absolutely, commonplace. If you go to a university and you start talking about Jesus, they're going to start distinguishing between the Jesus you learned about in Sunday school, and there'll be a little sneer in that, or the real Jesus, what we know about. The funny thing is, what they know about Jesus is absolutely no more now. I mean, they haven't learned anything about Jesus other than what the Scriptures present. But they have decided that they know more, because what they've done is they've said, well, we're going to take a look at the Scriptures from the point of view of an unbeliever. What would an unbeliever make of this? Well, let's just do a little thought experiment. Here's a Bible, okay, and same Bible that you and I have. But let's suppose that you were given the revelation that there is no God, and there are no prophets, and there are no angels, and you know this, and here's the same Bible. What are you going to do with it? What does this Bible represent now to you? Where does it come from?
Mankind's
It has to come from people, because there isn't anything else. Well, what would cause people to write this stuff? Why would you?
hallucinations and
We can think of different reasons why people think that strange things happen. We can be kind of comical and say, well, they're all on trips. Or we can be cynical, right? These are people wanting to aggrandize their own power, and so they create these stories and promulgate them to the masses so that the clergy will be very powerful.
Jesus was a charlatan who fooled a lot of people.
Or we can just assume, as arrogant modern people do, that people used to be much more naive and ignorant than they are now. And so it used to be that if you were somebody like Jesus, you could go around and say, yeah, I'm the Son of God. I created wine out of water. And people believed it. They were just so stupid then. They just didn't realize, like we realize today, that that's a miracle. You know that? You can't just take water and turn it into wine. But people used to just assume these things. People did not just used to assume these things. People knew what miracles were. They knew what sorts of things happened and what sorts of things didn't happen. They may not have had a scientific understanding of exactly all that goes into the chemical processes to make a glass of wine, but it didn't matter. They knew you can't just do that, and that's the reason why miracles are recorded as they are, is because these are things that don't just happen, and these people weren't ignorant, but we assume they are. So we read this book as an unbeliever, and we say, well, we have to find an explanation for all of this. The explanation has to be different than what the book itself says. Why? Well, because the book says this is God, and He created, and He sent His Son, and all of that. Well, we know that's not true. Okay, well, if it's not true, then how did this come up? Well, I don't know. There must be sociological reasons why people have to believe something, and so this is the reason why. And so this is people comforting themselves, and this is... What you have here is a view of Christianity as told from an unbeliever's point of view. Okay? Now, that's fine. I expect them to have a view of us. We send our kids to college, and that's what they get. And when they sit in the classroom, they don't realize what they're listening to. They don't realize that what they're listening to is an unbeliever's view of Christianity. What they think they're listening to is, this is what science has determined. We used to think that this is true, but now we know it's not. That's what, and your average 18 or 19-year-old, what do they know? You have all these professors with so many degrees after the name, and they're intelligent, winsome people, most of them. They seem to know what they're talking about. And they got all these books that they read. You go into their office and you're just overwhelmed. And they say it with such certainty and confidence, and they must know. And they don't. I mean, one of the many things that we should have learned in 2020 is how little we know about things that are right in front of us, right? Right in front of us.
masks work.
We don't know. Yeah, do masks work? When do they work? Why do they work? How do they work? Do they not work? What circumstances do they not work? What is the percentage of when they work? The answers to all these are fluid and all over the place. This is not a criticism. I'm not criticizing scientists because they don't know the answer to these things. If you actually are an honest scientist, you realize that there's really relatively little that we know when it comes to things like medicine and stuff like this. It's hard. But medicine is right in front of us. It's right in front of us, folks. We're not talking about eons before. We're not talking about galaxies away. We're talking about right in front of us. So an awful lot of this is presented as though it's truth and we know, because what we did is we developed a time machine. You would think that this would be the case. We developed a time machine at MIT, and we went back in time. And we went back to these various times, and we went right back to where Jesus was supposed to be on the cross. And guess what? He wasn't there. Or he was, and he died, and we hung around. Our guys hung around at the tomb, and we found out what happened. They went to the wrong tomb. What do you know about that? Jesus is still in this tomb where they buried him, but this stupid apostles, and everybody bought it. Okay? You would think that that's what we did. There's no such thing. It's just that it used to be that people would say, okay, this is what the apostles preached, and this is what we believe, and there's good historical and logical reasons to believe this. And there's always been people that have not believed it. Then at some point, some person that doesn't believe it dresses it up in scientific language and says, now we know. Right. Since moral reasoning has gone out the window as Christians understand it, what is the starting point for moral reasoning for a Christian? Well, it's the will of God, right? It's the nature and will of God. That's the be-all and end-all of moral reasoning. It always starts with God. And so something cannot be right if God says it's wrong. It doesn't matter if every single human being disagrees. It doesn't matter. Everything is theocentric in a Christian worldview. It all starts with God. And it ends with God. But when you don't have a God, you have problems with moral reasoning. So we already talked about a denial of what should be. The way we get a what should be is, well, what does God say about it? Okay? That gives us our what should be. Then we take around and we look around and see what is. Moral reasoning in the modern world is oriented around human need. Now that sounds good, doesn't it? That sounds good. It turns out that an awful lot of what God commands is oriented toward human need too. In other words, he is trying to help and benefit us. But ultimately, it's not about us. Ultimately, moral reasoning in the Christian church is not about us. It is about God. And that means some things that God demands are not good for human beings considered just from our point of view. Okay? For example, okay? Should we gather together and worship every Sunday?
Not in the pandemic.
Is that necessary to do that? Well, you're right. And even if not a pandemic, is this necessary that we do this? Why can't we just come when we feel like we need it? And you could say, well, you may not realize that you need it, but you need to come. So we can fashion a utilitarian explanation for worship. We should come to worship because whether you realize it or not, you really need this. Okay? That's a human need. That's a human-oriented point of view. Now, that's fine. That's fine. Worship is useful for that. Supposing I were to tell you that worship is not going to serve you any purpose. In fact, it's going to take 3 hours every single week of otherwise prime time. Should we now not worship? Why should you worship anyway? Because this is not about us. This is about God. If we manage to get some benefit out of it, is God angry about that? No. In fact, God wants us to get some benefit out of this. Is that the reason why we do it? No. And that's the thing. For a Christian, the practice of Christianity is about God, not about meeting human needs. Now, we should love our neighbor and we should feed the poor because God says so. Now, there may be other reasons too. The fact of the matter is, from a Christian point of view, why we say some things are right or wrong or good or bad or should be pursued or what is a good life or not, all relates to God and his character and what he has revealed. All of it. Otherwise, we're just guessing. I mean, there are things that we like and things that we don't. But if there is no God, then all you can really do is look at human need, and it becomes utilitarian. Utilitarian means essentially that which helps the most people most of the time is considered good. Okay? If it helps. Now, so an argument for free market capitalism is it helps the most people the most of the time. Do you agree with that? Okay, so, but the Christian would look at that and say, okay, it's good that we're helping more people rather than less. So that's a good point, and it's good that we help them more often rather than less often. That's a good point. But what if we can help 90% of the people wonderfully at the expense of the death of the other 10%? Now that also would help most people most of the time. What would a Christian say about that?
It's wrong.
You can't do that. Why not? Okay, here's a more down-to-earth example. Can we harvest stem cells from fetuses in order to cure diabetes? Now this suckers a lot of people because they'll say, well, wait a minute, you're doing a lot of benefit for a lot of people. And these fetuses, what are they ever going to know? Okay? That is a utilitarian argument that sounds good to a modern ear. However, to a Christian who's really thinking properly about that, we should be repulsed by that. Or sort of a Logan's Run concept. When you get to the age where you are being more expensive to society than you are producing, you should do the honorable thing and check out. Okay? And that too would be a good utilitarian argument. We won't do that. Okay. Now, education. I was reading a fascinating article that was trying to grapple with why the significant drop-off in adherence to church-going has occurred in this country over the last 50 years or so. And it was looking at various things, the rise in income levels and urbanization and various things like that, trying to correlate the drops off. And it went through a variety of things. It said, well, the problem is, and it showed all these counterexamples, well, this doesn't necessarily explain it, and that doesn't. The one thing it said, here correlates marvelously, and that is the secularization of public schools has correlated incredibly highly with the decrease in commitment to church attendance. Now, the yahoos that used to say when we took God out of the schools and the Ten Commandments out of the classrooms, that was the end of our nation. The reason why I call them yahoos is that's a very narrow view. They're being very moralistic there, but there's something true about that. And that is to say, education by its very nature is not just teaching people to read and write. It is passing on a reality. And remember what we talked about before. What is religion? It is reality. Now, I have not been a fan of public schools for a long time for this reason, and it's not a quality thing. Public schools can give you a very good education if you just want to talk about, I mean, if they don't, it's because of the incompetence of government, but it's not because by nature public can't do that. The problem is that education is by its very nature a deeply religious thing. And I don't mean a sectarian, I don't mean a particular denominational thing, I just mean it is you are passing on a reality. Look at how much of education is involved in, as I put up here, debunking myths and misconceptions, everything that you were taught growing up, everything that your grandparents believed we now know is wrong. This is the stuff of an awful lot of what passes for education. And this is why kids go off to school. And I'm not talking about going off to college. Yes, it's college. It's high school too. It's junior high. It's even in elementary school. There's no such thing as benign agnosticism. They want to be benignly agnostic. In other words, we're not going to say one way or the other whether there's a God. We're just going to stay out of that because people believe different ways. But the effect of that is you have taken sides. Taken sides is whether there's a God or not, who cares? It's irrelevant. Listen to that. The only way you can be an agnostic is if you confess at the same time that whether there's a God or not is irrelevant. If you said to yourself, there is either a God or not, and I'm going to either live this way or that way, then you are not going to be an agnostic. You are going to be an atheist or you're going to be a believer, one or the other. But if you live in the middle, what are you saying? It doesn't matter. So in our public schools, if you're going to be agnostic, which they feel like they have to be, right, to separate church and state, remember, separating church and state is to separate two organizations, which can and generally should be done. That's not the same as separating religion and public life. That's two different things. And the one can and should be done to a greater or lesser degree. The other can't be done. So if public schools are going to pass on a benignly agnostic view of the world, they are teaching our kids that God does not matter unless you like it. So it turns church into, like anything else. If you like going to movies, well then, if you like horror movies or thrillers or whatnot, then choose whatever floats your boat. That's fine. And if going to church helps you feel better about life, that's fine. See, it turns church into a human-centered thing, a completely relativistic thing, completely subjectivistic thing, and a completely meaningless thing from the point of view of anywhere else. Then, of course, if you come in here, you hear about Jesus as the Savior of the world. And you hear about the call to evangelize, what is evangelism but trying to impose a reality you believe on somebody else? Well, you're not really imposing it, you're calling upon, but I mean, ultimately, you're saying you're wrong and you're going to hell, and they just laugh at you. Partly because they think it's silly, but partly because it's an insane thing. What are you trying to convince me of that for? That's your reality, that helps you, okay. Now, one last thing I want to finish. I don't have much time here, but we all know that there are Christians who know that they're Christians, who know why they're Christians, who know what Christians believe, okay? And I'm talking about basic Christianity. So there is a fairly significant group of people in our country who know what that is and are committed to those things and recognize the difference when they see it. Are we also aware that there's a lot of Christians who call themselves Christians and go to church more or less, but really don't understand very much about what actually the church teaches? Yes. Do we also recognize that there's a whole lot of people out in our culture who don't go to church and don't claim to be Christians, but actually who are, we could put it this way, they are infected or infested with a lot of ideas that actually come from Christianity. They just don't realize it. They still think of God in terms of a personal God, if there is one. Or they may even think there is one. They still think of a soul, and like somehow or another when we die, we go somewhere. Okay? That's a Christian concept, that somehow or another your soul survives, and that if there's a God. And in our culture, the default is that there might be a God, and if there's a God, the default God is a personal God of some kind, okay? Rather than just a force out there. That's because of the influence of Christianity in our culture. In other words, you don't have to know a thing.
How much of it is hardwired that God created us to?
Well, we would teach that a lot of this is hardwired, that we just have this natural way of thinking about things. That's true. But I'm just looking at the broad swath of society. You'll realize that a lot of people have a lot of Christian ideas and don't know it. Doesn't make them Christians. I'm just saying they have that. And a lot of people who think they're Christians don't know what they're talking about. And a relatively few number know what they're talking about. It works the same way the other way. There is a small knot of people, and it's small, much smaller than the number of Christians there are, who know what a naturalist is, know what they believe, understand the implications of that, and bravely go forward with that. This is a relatively small group, and most of them are eggheads, and they're in universities, and they write books and things like that. Relatively few, because this is a very unattractive thing, and people don't typically flock to it to know more and more and more, but some do. However, there's an awful lot of people who call themselves, I just believe in what I see, but they still have a lot of ideas in their head that aren't really quite consistent with that. And many Christians have a lot of ideas that are consistent with naturalism, but they don't realize it. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is there are a few people who really know what it means to be a Christian, and there are a much smaller group who really knows what it means to be an atheist. In between, you have most people are a strange mixture of a little of this and a little of that, and they don't know. And unfortunately, a lot of them are sitting in our pews, infested with a lot of ideas that don't belong with their Christian faith, that don't come from the Scripture, that are absolutely antagonistic, but they don't realize it. It's just the way they've been raised, and it's the way the world is, and when you turn the TV on, that's the way it is. And so an awful lot of people default to certain, really very, like this idea that you can't impose your morality on anybody else and all of that. It just shows such a total lack of understanding about what morality is and what all of this is about. And they don't realize that that comes from a point of view where there is no right or wrong, and therefore we all make it up on our own, which is totally contrary to Christianity. Okay? I'm going to close with that, folks, because it's 10 till, and I got to quit, otherwise Danny's going to get after me. All right, let's pray. Lord Jesus, you are the Word become flesh, the one sure thing that we have in this world, the one thing that we know, and it's true for us and it's true for all, and it's true at the beginning and it will be true at the end. And help us, Lord, not to be fooled, tricked by the wisdom of this world, which is foolishness to you. And instead, help us to cling to the words that you've given to us and the truth that you've given to us, because in that truth is life. Amen.